She led him to stairs that wound deep below the tower's underground to a darkness cold and wet, where stone with greyish-green moss was overgrown, crusted with saltpeter and milky lime layered into place over uncounted time. As scattered torches lit their slow, uneasy steps, the muted glow cast strange, warped shadows glaring all around, like faces of ghosts staring after. Neither cold nor warm, he felt a numb chill down his form, as if a boundary lay where the last step of the tower's stair had been set. She did not follow him down, but remained on the steps with a frown of sorrow.
"Beyond here, straight ahead, you shall need no guide," she said.
To his questioning look, she gave no reply, but with the vaguest glance of pity and a sigh almost inaudible, she turned away and left him before a narrow passageway. Hunched and cramped, he slipped through a low tunnel and into a domed crypt of rich splendor, lined with rows of sculpted monuments in the burnt rose shade of torches, topped with effigies of the dead in polished marble and elegies carved onto hard bases of mixed stone and varied colors. Alone within the chamber, he became aware of the complete stillness, the stare of many eyes gazing ever into vacant shadow. Never having seen its like, tentatively the knight paced through the tombs as light streaked across the immobile forms along harsh, criss-crossed angles. A strong pungency from above assaulted his senses, and he gazed up to a vaulted ceiling of chalk-encrusted stone with patches of earth and greyish-toned sod. He felt his hand idly lain upon cold stone, his fingers gently worrying the hard, glassy surface, his head bowed over the pale image of a dead figure, a young man with bearded jaw and strong brow, shoulders to flanks all muscled and lean from the toil of oxen, plough, and tended soil. Staring close, he recognized a deep scar down the arm, and realized at once that he had years ago caused the wound, when with spear and bow, the two as boys chased swift deer, bounding through the forest brush, in fear of their whistling arrows. Just as they lost the trail of their prey, however, a boar crossed their path, and began to snort and rear its mauling form toward them. Spear sure in his grip, he thrust true toward it, just as his friend threw also, the other's extended arm sent wide, blocking where his own spear went. As one strike thus pierced the open maw, the other gashed into the boy's raw limb, gaping in the howl of the beast's death cry. So came the scar that now lay by his hand, etched artlessly into the rock, but the boy that he once knew lay not before, but a man in his prime, one who had flourished in the waning time of much hardship, scarcely younger than he was. And as he gazed about the tombs, the sea of anonymous faces he saw take on the shape of those he loved, now gone. He saw his mother lying in motionless repose, whom he had left to hopeless grief, as her husband long before had also done, taken by the law of chivalry to quest, and the field of battle from which she had tried to shield him. Upon her sad, kind face he read a cold peace, her still young hands folded in resignation, not quite freed of the sorrow driven by his wandering need. An epitaph carved on the base of the tomb read, "Media vita in morte sum," and with those words echoing on his lips, tears welled in his eyes for her years of loneliness, even as the face sat unmoved alike for the grace or pity of his heart. Next to her lay his betrothed, who chose to stay and aid her lands, till in the fullness of time he would take her in bridal dress to a chapel of kings, bathed in sunlight and blue-stained glass, atop a white palace of towered spires girded with parapets, the unfurled banners of champions rippling in the hard breeze of clear skies. In time, he came to regard such hope as a kind of beautiful delusion he could neither believe nor renounce, a fusion of the best and worst of his innocence, and yet it summoned both courage and purpose unmet in him otherwise, even in hours most despairing. Now such powers, real or illusory, lay empty before the figure arrested in stone, more beautiful than his memory, its white, pale translucence and glinting bright texture, akin to alabaster flickering and dying faster than he could fix each image as it came to him.
"And have I come," he whispered, "these many miles, through lands and seas, to look upon your grave and endure the poor, sad monument of what you were? And too late now have I come for you to know my return, or to hope for the joining of our hearts once more, fulfilling vows to each other that outlast death, memory, or the force that gave them breath. After all the words never said, and emptiness of journeys led to no end, noble wars never fought, simple truths never sought, promises never kept, and tears of joy never wept. Was there not world enough, my love, for a heart untouched by the scorn of days, or time enough at all to gather hours by grace you saw in the simplest accidents, beyond design or pretense, for brownish locks flecked with gold, or a heart as young as its soul was old, too deep for reason, too beautiful for eyes, one great truth in a world of lies?"
With this, he knelt beside her form and kissed the lips, feeling the stone grow warm along the cheek and down the soft breast to his tender stroking, while aloft the shade of burning torches lent stirred blushes upon its pale surface. Bent over, he kissed it once again, tracing his lips over its length often, feeling the smooth limbs grow lax and supple under his mouth, as might wax in the heat of sunshine melt and dimple to the touch. So he felt her body over and over brought to life, while his heart fought against disbelief and shame. In prayer, he placed his lips over the layer of skin along her neck, and on his tongue felt a pulse throbbing, and a body's moisture as sobbing broke from his chest, throat swollen with choked tears. He lifted a weary gaze to her face, and through the bleary haze saw her form suffused with rose pinks, dotted with freckles, like those he remembered upon her cheeks, the hair of her temples in distinct strands there in many shades of gold, white, and honey brown, as if from light sleep, her eyes quivering open, blinking aimlessly from drowsiness. Then, as the dreamy eyes fell upon his own, joy and sorrow mingled on his brow with such equal measure that he could neither take pleasure in the belief of her living form, nor feel the guilt just hovering beyond conscious thought that she must be dead, neither able to trust his senses or reject them. Thus paralyzed and half incredulous still of her transformation, he could not resist its motion toward him, the gaze of her golden brown eyes liquid hard, the gown of sheer white clinging to curves supple, soft and full, nerves awakened to the flush of sensation. As he struggled with lingering hesitation, he found his hand in her cold grasp, that in its stone-like hold seemed to numb his sense of feeling and left him disoriented, reeling and unsteady, leaning more upon the form that guided him on through the crypt and tunnel and back up the stairs, his limbs slack, yielding to the touch, yet at the same time its presence and manner came so near his expectation, so unaltered by years of sorrow, not to seem too perfect to be believed, so that with each doubt he grieved anew, as if with a thought, the hope that she could be brought back to him, he killed before he would allow any more prospect of false joy. For still, she did not speak to him, even as he searched in vain for words that could bridge so many years, or would assuage regret for acts that left him without a life together, and bereft of the grail as well. So in lieu of looking directly at her, he drew close to her face alongside, and heard the rise and fall of breath stirred by the long stair climb, eyes cast up the spiral coils, past what seemed an open roof to starlight glimmering in the deep night sky. Swerving, his head craned backward as the fixed gaze strained to make sense of the image, he turned and buried his face into her, letting himself be carried up, with barely enough strength to keep himself steady along the length of stair that remained. Eyes shut, he felt himself pulled slantwise through a doorway to a chamber hollow with the ringing of their footfalls echo along smooth flagstone, the dry hiss-crackle of fire passing by as they moved on. Then, his face still turned to her. When he sensed himself near collapse, he felt himself lowered to a bed as she knelt over, back and shoulders reclining on a pillowed headboard, fresh linen lining the firm down, his feet uncovered and lifted under bedclothes smothered in warmth, the cold finally easing under his skin with the pleasing touch of dry cloth and the pressure of her seated form beside. Her hands grasp, he felt tugging at his sodden, now wet tunic as he sat upright, gently pulling the garment off. Then, with an ointment of spiced oils, she cleaned and dressed his wounds as his hips caressed the soft sheets, toes stretching out to graze the ridges and folds about his skin. His eyes, still closed, waited from long exhaustion, dreamily sated also upon the deep reverie brought by so rare attention physically to his comfort. He flinched at the touch of her hands upon his own, with such recognition, for it was often she used to soothe them, worn and abused by hard practice, knowing, calm fingers working a gliding balm over broken calluses, that all suddenly he opened his eyes and saw her finally, as much in recognition as he had done before with suspicion. For though he long knew to detect signs too perfect for one not to expect duplicity, no craft or fairy art could feign language of the heart or recreate the manner whereby someone's hand would once lie in another's 10 years past, when even the sense of it could not outlast the moment of its own making, save as loss, in an aching, imprecise, physical, yet undefined, beyond reach of the conscious mind. Her hands against his own, then he felt not like an echo of memory, but an awakening to sensation unsounded by recollection until the flood of its tenderness washed over him with tearfalls, in likeness of its own life force. And yet as he gazed up to her, he stared amazed at her own expression, for while he wavered in discerning her presence as guile or truth, he was surprised to find much the same in return, eyes of such sad regard that made it seem as if she were real, and he the dream, haunting the final thoughts of a lady's memory of love, long ago. Thus hovering as if behind a veil, covering one from the other, unbreached, insurmounted, he reached out to her as he spoke.
I remember you surrounded by friends once, playing where a river bends along a forest bank that made sunlight mingle with shade, luminous girls with cheeks of rose, loose braids swaying, tied with bows streaming, rustling skirts ivory white, smooth, soft, gleaming bright, tucked to the knee, where scars green and red marked the pale sheen of limbs, the blush of maiden thighs steeped in emerald grassy dyes, ancient games and joy without malice, generous, devout, muddied earth caked to hands, clinging to fingers like wedding bands, full lips flushed, glistening wet, bathed in laughter, dripping sweat in the cool warmth, the evening sun sinking in the horizon, almost run its course, its dark pink glow upon the billowing clouds so pure, resplendent in golden rays and white suspended in a rosy haze against the evening star, so high above us and our little world. A sky so perfect it seemed the light of angels reached from its height to touch a true and rare moment of grace, the living embodiment of his glory and love. And I remember you in the center of that play, and the many gazes bent upon your smiling form in innocent wonder. For you kindness was never a mask or a pose, but ever the strength that flowed out and back again to you, as surely as it did then in your love, and in the way it returned to you as the day shines new in 1,000 shades, or as each leaf in glades of fall gold sounds in symphony with its brethren into harmony as unpurposed as rare. Strange, then, is it not, to search so long and range so far for something you knew your whole life, and in vain to look for that which cannot be discerned by sight or word, alone, nor learned in days shared in either blessing or in hardship.
Still caressing his hand, she leaned over and held him in her arms, while he, impelled by the nearness of her, brought his mouth to her shoulder and caught upon his tongue the soft flesh of her body, breathed in the fresh scent of skin, swirled hair against lips that lay there in fragile silk strands, and felt ashamed at so clinging to her, blamed his faltering resolve, shamed still more by the scars and gashes that tore his own frame, lips cracked, slit from long winter winds, split into hairline fissures. He tasted as he held them to her, wasted form pressing through weak skin, distended ribs hollow under flesh, extended past endurance to a pallor he scorned to place near her, the colour of her neck radiant with the flush of reawakened life, blush flaming down to breast, wealth of hips spread in the sensuous health of their sloping arch, taking away his reason, his thought aching at the sight. Responding to his desire, she raised herself to knees higher overtop him, hands pulling back, found the clasps of her gown, and unbound by turns their gatherings, slipped from each shoulder the cloth down sides to reach her waist. Just as easily, she lay by his side, enfolding like the sea his shaking form, rigid and tensed over, his eyes involuntarily clenched, brought to sudden tears that burst in nervous spasms at the first contact of her soft limbs, and then it seemed he heard the laugh of maidens, or dreamed them, in unison, the chanting sound of graces, and dancing all around, the blessing of a marriage song calling Hymen Io Hymen along the edge of hearing. As they lay there, as if from far away a faint, airy voice he heard, sorrowful and near to death, that whispered,
"What is the secret of the grail? Whom does it serve?"
At this, the stale air of a tomb suddenly came to him, an awful scent, the same as decayed flesh over time dried to bone, thick about him as he tried to open his eyes. Beside him, instead of the lady, a man's form lay spread out in the bed, sick, breathing in laboured gasps and moist wheezing, thick with phlegm that caked at his mouth, face and arms raked with sores scabbed over that tore open in sudden jerks of pain. Frozen before the figure, by no coincidence he recalled the regard of his countenance, in the dignity of a reserve that refused to cry out in order to preserve his remaining strength. Along the thigh blood oozed onto the dry white sheets from a wound that would never heal until its secret could be unlocked from a fallen world. Reaching out in sympathy, yet in doubt inwardly as well, he recoiled in disgust at the sick form with its soiled clothes, worn, stained and acrid, nauseating in their fetid smell. Overwhelmed by the assault of these sensations, and by his fault in giving in to both a sorrow and guilt unredeemed by so much as an attempt to see through his despair, he felt his skin freeze over, and his heart like iron seas, colder and colder, drowning under sensations of fear and wonder, until he found himself underneath a thin white veil or haze, beneath either the translucent bedsheet, or else a layer of frost and sleet, and then, still in confusion, he sensed how he might still be slumped against the shallow snow-banked hillside, onto which he collapsed exhausted so many hours ago. At first, waiting for a sign of where he was, meditating upon the hints of dark and light, where the fragile canopy of ice might break, and scatter numbing cold he thought to have evaded in the hours that had brought him to the tower, he lay puzzled, And in the cold, still silence, he listened overtop the violence of his pulse, racing under breath held, suspended, waiting, second after second withheld for a noise, a whisper, any sound to carry through the ice or redound off the neighboring hills, lungs aching in the twilight, hard blood breaking over the fragile heartbeat, while still the quiet lingered, a faint smile growing in the gentle, slow mounting of the morning glow, raising eyes to brightening skies over cold and barren snow.